Welcome to the very first episode of Pawcessing Thoughts, a Pardon My Frenchy podcast, the podcast where no topic is off leash. I'm super excited to introduce you to your new favorite pups, Tokyo and Nipsey. These two have some serious spark and even bigger ideas. Today, they're diving headfirst into a topic that's close to every dog's heart. The practice of neutering, and why it might be time for a change in the way we think about it. Get ready for some tail-wagging, thought-provoking conversation straight from the mouths of two very opinionated French bulldogs. Now, let's let Tokyo and Nipsey do what they do best.
You know, it's almost a given in the U.S., isn't it? You get a dog, you get it neutered.
Right. It feels like the standard thing.
Exactly what responsible pet owners do. But have you ever stopped to ask why? Like, why is that belief so strong here? What's the underlying fear maybe that drives this?
It's definitely a question with a lot packed into it. And our mission today is really to unpack all of that. The origins, the evolution of this, really ingrained idea about dog neutering, specifically in the U.S.
Okay.
We'll be looking at historical shifts, animal welfare movements, which are huge here, veterinary science developments, and just societal norms.
Right, how it all came together.
Yeah, trying to understand why it feels so completely necessary to so many people.
And to do that, we've been digging through quite a bit of material articles, some historical accounts, looking at what welfare groups and vets have been saying and doing.
Yeah, good stack of info.
Okay, so let's rewind. Because how we see it today definitely wasn't always the case.
Not even close. It's pretty eye-opening, actually, when you compare now to, say, a century ago. Back then, the idea of routinely neutering a pet, often seen as cruel.
Cruel? Really?
Yeah. We found this account from 1893, neutering a male cat. The method. Basically, roll it in a blanket, no anesthetic. Just do it.
Wow.
You could ask for chloroform or cocaine, apparently, but that cost extra.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, the early view wasn't about compassionate care. It highlights just how drastically things have shifted,
That's brutal. It makes you appreciate modern vet care, but also just how values change. So when did neutering actually start becoming like a thing? It wasn't originally for pets, was it?
Not at all, no. Historically, neutering was mostly for livestock management.
Okay.
Cattle, horses, sheep, primarily to manage behavior, make them easier to handle, and, prevent unplanned breeding and farming.
Makes sense.
We even see documentation for capturing horses making geldings way back in the 7th century BC. So the idea isn't new, but applying it routinely to pets, that's much more recent. Spaying and neutering for cats and dogs didn't really become widely available or even accessible until maybe the 1930s.
The 1930s, that late?
Relatively speaking, yeah. It's quite recent in the grand scheme of things.
So what happened around the 30s? Why did it start picking up for pets then?
A big factor was more people living in cities and suburbs, urbanization.
Okay.
As pet ownership grew in these denser areas, the problem of unwanted animals just became much more visible, much harder to ignore.
Ah, the stray problem.
Exactly. During the Depression, the ASPCA in New York City, they were dealing with over 300,000 stray animals a year.
300,000 in just one city?
Per year. It's a staggering number. It really paints a picture of the crisis they were facing. It kind of set the stage for needing some kind of solution. Shelters were just completely overwhelmed.
I can't even fathom that number. Okay, so the situation was dire.
It really was. And for the 1970s, with sterilization not being widely accessible or affordable, euthanasia rates were incredibly high.
How high are we talking?
Some estimates put it around 100 cats and dogs killed for every 1,000 people in the population.
Wow.
And the methods used then, well, they were often harsh by our standards today.
Yeah.
Drowning, shooting. Unfortunately, these were sometimes seen as necessary ways to manage the sheer volume of unwanted animals.
That's a really grim picture. It sounds like an absolute crisis. Something had to change. So what was the turning point?
A really significant moment was in 1969. The first low-cost spay-neuter clinic opened in Los Angeles.
Okay, LA 1969.
Yeah. And that event really sparked a national conversation. It brought attention to sterilization as a potential solution and highlighted the need to make it accessible.
And how was it framed initially? Was it about animal welfare right away?
Interestingly, not entirely. Initially, the messaging often focused more on owner convenience, less roaming, maybe fewer nuisance behaviors.
Convenience. That seems secondary now.
It does now, yeah. But maybe back then, the novelty and the accessibility were the key selling points. As the scale of the overpopulation problem became clearer and, animal welfare awareness grew, the framing shifted.
Okay, so when did that shift happen towards it being an animal welfare issue?
Pretty quickly after that clinic opened, actually. Over the next decade or so, shelters and rescue groups really ramped up campaigns. They strategically reframed spaying and neutering as a critical animal welfare issue.
Ah, the ethical angle.
Exactly. This wasn't just convenient anymore. It was positioned as the right thing to do for animals, a moral obligation. And then in 1972, the ASPCA made a big move. Mandatory sterilization for all animals adopted from them.
That feels like a key policy. Did it start to make a difference?
It seems so. As awareness grew, and importantly, as sterilization became more accessible through clinics like the one in LA, shelter intake rates did begin to decline over time.
So progress.
Definitely. And then you see more targeted strategies emerge later. In the 90s, things like trap, neuter, return, TNR for feral cat colonies started becoming more common.
Right, TNR.
And around the same time, the no-kill movement really gained steam, pushing to end euthanasia for healthy, treatable animals.
And did the numbers reflect this? Did euthanasia rates actually drop?
Dramatically. Compared to those peak rates, 100 per 1,000 people. In recent decades, it's fallen to around 12.5 per 1,000.
Wow, that's huge.
It's nearly a 90% reduction from maybe 50 years ago. It really shows the impact accessible sterilization had on that crisis.
Okay, so clearly the sheer number of unwanted pets and the resulting euthanasia was the massive engine driving this whole push. Sterilization was seen as the most humane tool they had.
Precisely. For animal welfare organizations, it was the most effective way they saw to tackle the root cause, the overwhelming number of births. Mass euthanasia was this terrible reality they were desperate to change.
Okay, so we see the crisis. Now, let's dig into how the animal welfare groups and societal changes really amplified that message. The animal welfare movement itself goes way back, right?
It does. The ASPCA, founded way back in 1866, initially, their focus was more on direct cruelty, abuse and neglect cases providing shelter. But managing the population of animals became a growing concern over time.
When did population control become a focus?
You start seeing specific initiatives aimed at preventing births more around the 1930s, often driven by individual rescuers seeing the problem firsthand.
Yeah.
And like we said, urbanization just made it all more acute.
And the big national organizations, they really took up the banner for spay-neuter.
Oh, absolutely. Groups like the Humane Society of the United States, HSUS, and the ASPCA have been absolutely pivotal. Constant campaigns, consistent messaging about responsible pet ownership.
That phrase is key.
It really is, framing it as an ethical duty. And you mentioned public figures. You can't discount someone like Bob Barker. Decades on TV, ending every show.
Help control the pet population, have your pets spayed or neutered. Yeah, it's iconic.
Exactly. That kind of constant mainstream reminder. It really helps normalize something.
And I guess as our whole relationship with pets shifted, that made people more receptive.
I think so, yeah. Pets moving from, working animals or outdoor animals to being part of the family inside the house. That creates a much stronger desire to ensure their well-being.
Right. We care more about their health, their safety.
And that makes owners more open to messages about preventative care, like sterilization, especially when it's framed as being for the animal's own good or for the good of animals collectively.
So this constant drumbeat year after year, it just becomes the expected thing, the social norm.
Pretty much. It's gotten to the point where not neutering can actually lead to social friction. You see it online, people questioning owners who choose not to, sometimes labeling them irresponsible.
That social pressure is real.
Definitely. It reinforces the idea that it's not just optional, it's what you're supposed to do.
And vets have obviously been a huge part of this too.
Absolutely. Veterinarians hold a lot of authority. For decades, they routinely recommended spaying and neutering as just standard preventative care.
And why were they recommending it so strongly?
Often the same reasons: concerns about overpopulation, trying to prevent certain behavioral issues, and also preventing specific reproductive health problems like pyometra or testicular cancer. For a long time, it was just a blanket recommendation, often for early spay-neuter.
But that's changing a bit now, isn't it? I feel like I hear more nuanced advice from vets these days.
Yes, that's a really crucial point we'll get into more. New research is definitely leading to an evolution in veterinary recommendations. There's a lot more discussion about timing, even if it's necessary for every single dog.
Okay, interesting. So the vet's advice carries weight. And combined with the societal pressure and the history, it's a powerful combination. Now, what about the media's role in all this, getting the word out?
Oh, huge. TV, print, Now, obviously, digital platforms, that 1969 LA clinic opening we talked about, that made news. It sparked discussion nationally.
And those PSAs, Bob Barker wasn't the only one, right?
No, but he was incredibly consistent. Those PSAs were very effective at hammering home the core message. Pet overpopulation is a crisis. Sterilization is the solution.
And the animal welfare groups were savvy about using media, too.
Very. They produced tons of literature, built websites, used social media, often using really strong emotional appeals images of homeless animals, drawing that direct line between not neutering and animals being euthanized.
Right, hitting the heartstrings.
And over time, they also layered in the messages about direct benefits to the pet health advantages, better behavior making the case even stronger.
And then in some areas, it went beyond recommendations and campaigns. It became law.
That's right. Some places, most notably Los Angeles County, actually implemented mandatory spay-neuter laws.
Mandatory?
Yeah, often requiring sterilization by a pretty young age, like 4 months old.
4 months? That seems really early. What was the logic?
Just trying to be as aggressive as possible in tackling overpopulation and bringing down those shelter euthanasia numbers.
Are there exceptions?
Usually, yes. Exemptions for, like, registered show dogs, working dogs, or if there's a specific medical reason certified by a vet. But if you don't comply and don't have an exemption, you could face fines or even be ordered to sterilize the animal at your own cost.
So the law really doubles down on the idea that this is necessary.
It absolutely reinforces that perception.
But are those laws universally accepted? Is there pushback?
Oh yeah, there's definitely debate. Proponents say they do reduce shelter intake and euthanasia, that they're a necessary tool. Opponents raise concerns about government overreach, individual owner rights.
Right.
Plus questions about enforcement. Is it practical? And could it have unintended consequences, like people maybe surrendering pets if they can't afford the mandatory surgery?
That's a valid concern. What do the big organizations say about mandatory laws?
Interestingly, the ASPCA, while a huge proponent of spay-neuter generally, doesn't actually support mandatory laws for all owned pets.
Oh.
They cite a lack of really strong, conclusive evidence that these broad mandatory laws significantly impact shelter intake or euthanasia rates across the board compared to targeted programs and accessible low-cost options.
Okay. So, drilling down a bit, at the core of this huge push for neutering, there seems to be this fear about intact dogs. What are the big worries?
It really boils down to two main things: behavior and health. There's a very common belief that neutering, especially males, will fix or prevent problems like aggression, roaming to find mates, and urine marking.
And is that true? Does the science back that up?
Well, it's complicated. Some studies do show that neutering can reduce certain behaviors that are strongly driven by sex hormones, like roaming or mounting.
Okay.
However, newer research is painting a much more complex picture. It suggests neutering isn't some magic bullet for behavior. And in some cases, for some dogs, it might actually increase issues like fearfulness, anxiety, or even certain types of aggression.
Increase them.
The thinking is that removing sex hormones might affect confidence or impulse control in some individuals. It really seems to depend a lot on the dog's individual temperament, breed, and maybe even their environment and training.
So it's definitely not a simple fix for behavior problems.
And not universally, no. The blanket assumption that it solves all behavior issues is being seriously questioned by current research.
Okay, that's important context. What about the health side? What are the established benefits of not leaving a dog intact?
There are definitely some well-established benefits. For males, neutering eliminates the risk of testicular cancer entirely, and it significantly reduces the risk of benign prostatic hyperplasia, basically, and a enlarged prostate, which can cause problems later in life.
Okay, those sound significant. And for females?
For females, spaying prevents pyometra, which is a potentially life-threatening uterine infection. That's a big one. It also drastically reduces the risk of mammary tumors, breast cancer, especially if the spay is done before her first heat cycle.
Right, I've heard that about mammary cancer, but then there are also potential downsides to neutering health-wise. That's what the newer research is looking at.
Exactly. This is where the conversation is really shifting. Studies are flagging potential increased risks for certain health problems in neutered dogs.
Like what?
Things like certain types of cancer, osteosarcoma, bone cancer, hemangiosarcoma, which affects blood vessels, lymphoma, mast cell tumors. Some studies suggest neutered dogs might have a higher incidence of these.
Why would that be?
The exact mechanisms aren't fully understood, but it likely involves the role sex hormones play in the immune system and overall development. Removing those hormones, especially early, might disrupt some protective effects or normal regulatory processes in certain individuals or breeds.
And it's not just cancer.
No. There's also concern about increased rates of certain joint disorders, hip dysplasia, elbow dysplasia, cranial cruciate ligament CCL tears.
The knee ligament, why would neutering affect joints?
Again, it relates to hormones influencing development. Sex hormones play a role in regulating bone growth and when the growth plates close. Early neutering might alter that timing, potentially leading to structural issues in some dogs, especially larger breeds, may be predisposed to these conditions.
Okay. Anything else?
There's also some potential association with hypothyroidism and, particularly in spayed females, urinary incontinence.
So it's really not a simple calculation of good versus bad. It sounds like it varies a lot.
Absolutely. That's the key takeaway from the recent science. These risks and benefits aren't uniform. They can differ significantly based on the dog's breed. Some breeds seem much more susceptible to certain issues than others.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Some studies have highlighted, for instance, female golden retrievers. They seem to have a notably increased risk of certain cancers if spayed, perhaps regardless of age, whereas for other breeds, the risks might be different or less pronounced.
So breed, sex, and also the age it's done makes a difference.
Yes. The age of neutering is a huge factor in the current discussion. Early age neutering, like before 6 months, is being reevaluated because of potential impacts on development versus waiting until a dog is more physically mature.
This really complicates the simple just do it message.
It really does.
Yeah.
It moves us away from a one-size-fits-all approach. And of course, layered on top of all these individual health considerations is still that very real, persistent fear of contributing to pet overpopulation. Preventing accidental litters remains a powerful motivator for many owners.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about the architects of this narrative. We know the animal welfare groups were central.
Absolutely central and incredibly influential. The ASPCA, HSUS, Best Friends Animal Society, their consistent campaigns, education materials, advocacy work, all focused on promoting spay-neuters as the cornerstone of responsible ownership and the solution to overpopulation. Their impact can't be overstated.
And the veterinary associations like the AVMA, what's their official stance been?
The AVMA, the American Veterinary Medical Association, provides the professional guidelines. Historically and generally, they've supported spay-neuter for population control and cited the known health and behavioral benefits we discussed earlier.
But are they acknowledging the newer research?
Yes, they are. Their stance has become more nuanced. They acknowledge the emerging research on potential long-term risks and the variability between breeds and individuals.
So what do they recommend now?
Their emphasis now is much more on an informed case-by-case assessment. Vets are encouraged to discuss the specific risks and benefits with owners, considering the dog's breed, age, lifestyle, intended use, and the owner's ability to manage an intact animal responsibly. It's moving away from that automatic universal recommendation.
That sounds like a more balanced approach. And both the welfare groups and vet associations helped make it physically possible for so many people, right? Through clinics.
Exactly. They've both been crucial in funding, supporting, and promoting low-cost spay-neuter clinics and initiatives. Making it affordable and accessible was key to the widespread adoption we see today.
And the science itself keeps evolving. It sounds like that's what's really driving the shift now.
It really is. Those growing concerns about cancer risks, joint issues, that's fueling debate within the veterinary community. Questioning the optimal timing, questioning if it should be routine for every dog, especially certain breeds.
Leading to more individualized care?
Precisely. It's pushing towards tailored recommendations rather than a blanket policy.
Are there other options besides traditional spay and neuter being discussed?
Yes, there are alternatives starting to get a bit more attention. Things like vasectomy for males or ovary-sparing spay, hysterectomy for females. They basically sterilize the animal, prevent reproduction, but leave the hormone-producing organs, testes, ovaries, intact.
So they still get the hormones.
Exactly. The potential benefit is maintaining the natural hormonal balance, which might mitigate some of the long-term health risks associated with traditional neutering while still preventing litters.
Is that common yet?
Not nearly as common. They aren't as widely practiced, maybe not as widely discussed or available yet. But it's an area of developing interest, kind of a potential future direction as we learn more about hormone impacts.
Fascinating. And all of this, the history, the science, the social pressure, it must shape what actual pet owners believe and do. What do you see in terms of owner perspectives?
Oh, absolutely. If you look at online discussions, forums, You see the whole spectrum. People who are staunchly pro-routine neutering, often citing the overpopulation issue and behavioral benefits.
With traditional view.
Right, and then you have owners expressing really significant concerns, primarily about the long-term health risks that are coming to light.
What are the main reasons people give for neutering?
Still number one for many is preventing accidental litters, contributing to the overpopulation problem. Then hopes for behavioral improvements, less roaming, aggression, marking, and the established health benefits, like preventing pyometra or testicular cancer.
And the reasons people choose not to, or to delay?
Primarily those emerging health concerns, the cancers, the joint issues. Also worries about potential negative changes in personality or energy levels. Some feel strongly about an owner's right to choose, or believe they can manage an intact dog responsibly. And some want their dog to reach full physical and hormonal maturity before considering it.
It's a lot for an owner to weigh. And it's really important to remember this intense focus on neutering isn't global, is it?
That's such a critical point. Our perspective here in the U.S. is definitely not universal. Attitudes vary dramatically.
Like where?
Well, in some European countries, for example, routine surgical neutering of pets is much less common. It's sometimes even viewed as unnecessary mutilation, unless there's a specific medical reason.
Mutilation, that's strong.
Yeah. And in Scandinavian countries like Norway or Sweden, the laws are often much stricter, generally only allowing sterilization for documented medical necessity, not routinely for population control or convenience.
So our approach is actually quite unique in its intensity.
It really puts the U.S. situation into perspective. It highlights how much our specific history with the overpopulation crisis and the dedicated campaigning by welfare groups has shaped our current norms.
Okay, so wrapping this up, this really strong, almost default belief in neutering dogs in the U.S., it clearly grew out of a very real crisis pet overpopulation and was massively amplified by the animal welfare movement.
Right. It became deeply embedded as a social norm, pushed by media messages, reinforced by veterinary recommendations for decades, and in some places, even written into law, and driven by understandable fears about behavior and health in intact dogs.
But the crucial takeaway now seems to be that the science is evolving.
Exactly. We're understanding more about potential long-term health risks associated with removing those hormones, especially depending on breed, sex, and age. And that's prompting a necessary shift towards more nuanced, individualized discussions and decisions.
So it leaves you thinking, doesn't it? Given all that history, the societal weight, and these emerging scientific complexities, how should an individual owner today navigate this? How do you decide what's truly responsible for your dog, considering everything? What are the deeper questions owners should be asking their vets and maybe asking themselves beyond just the standard advice we've heard for so long? It's definitely not as simple as it once seemed.
For years, it's been the norm, almost expected for dogs to be neutered. But is it really the best thing for every dog? Tokyo and Nipsey think not. They're barking up the right tree with this conversation, challenging us to look at the bigger picture, questioning the norms, and making us think twice about what's truly best for our furry companions. They're asking some tough questions, and I think it's about time we listened.